Good morning, everyone. This is a reading from Whispers from Eternity, a book of prayer demands and poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. Prayer demand number 2. We demand of thee as thy children. Thou art our Father. We are made in thine image. We are thy children. We neither ask nor pray as beggars, but demand of thee as thy children the gifts of wisdom, salvation, health, happiness, and eternal joy. Whether naughty or good, we are still thy children, all of us. Help us to perceive and understand inwardly thy will for us. Teach us the independent use of our human will, since thou gavest it to us to use freely, attuned to thy wisdom-guided will. This story of the prodigal son is, it's such a wonderful story for everyone. When we hear it, I get happy every year when it comes up. And I was particularly happy that it came up today so that I could speak about it. It's a pretty clear, in some ways, when you first look at it, story that Jesus is telling here in this parable. He says we are created not just in the image of God, but of God. We're given a choice, free will, as Master just spoke about in his Whispers reading. And of course, we've all made the choice at some point, in this life, past lives, to go out into the world, to really reject this infinite consciousness, infinite mansion, Swamiji calls it, of the divine, and we move out into the world of materialism, of egoic limitation. We choose that at some point, and we stay there until we're hungry, and in fact, in the story of this parable, starving. Of course, it's a parable, so it's told in the time of famine, but of course the famine, we know, represents our soul's longing, our soul's hunger. But even the son, the young son in the parable, doesn't know that. He's just hungry for food, and he finds himself not even being able to receive on this farm where he's working. And the farm, of course, represents all of that outward world, searching, looking to fulfill something that we can never really fulfill out there. And he's feeding these pigs, and he can't even be given what he is giving to what they're calling swine. The swine are eating better than he is. And he goes ultimately back to his father when he realizes that whoever works for his father is eating better, is being treated better. So he goes back expecting to be a slave, really, for his father. And it's important to realize he doesn't actually go back in an exalted state. It's not like he was out in this barren world and said, oh, now I realize I need to turn the attention of my desires inward. I need to refocus where I'm looking for satisfaction. That doesn't happen. He's just hungry. So he goes home. He sort of crawls home. He's begging his father. But his father, of course, has none of that. And everything that happens, everything his father does, has meaning. Only a slave would be without shoes in those times, remember. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit in a moment. This parable was being told over 2,000 years ago. So the whole language that was being used, the way Jesus needed to try and speak to everyone, was dramatically different than what he might say today. And not only that, he was presenting really new ideas. He was speaking about God in ways that the people of that time had never heard before. So the son comes back, and what does the father do? He runs to him, and he says to all of the people in his home, bring him clothes, put a beautiful ring on him, put shoes on his feet, and fetch the fatted cow and kill it, and we'll celebrate. And the fatted cow in those days was so precious. You saved it for huge ceremonies. It was a sign of wealth, and it was very costly. So there's so much more in the story, but he does all of this. And Swamiji doesn't speak about it here, but there is an older brother who has stayed home with the father and who has worked with the father. So let me go back for a moment. I think it's important because we could just feel this son came home, and it's true, without any realization of the truth. He came home. And of course, the allegories there, the meanings there, he was hungry. But again, Jesus didn't say he came home and he prostrated himself at his father's feet and said, now I see, you actually have everything I need. You are love, you are truth. He was trying to say, I'm totally unworthy, I don't deserve anything. Just let me work for you so that I can eat. So he had not attained any realization at this point, but the father didn't care. Really saying to us, God doesn't care. He simply wants us to turn towards him. Then he can take us and love us. But I'd like to go back and hold this all up in the light of what it meant 2,000 years ago. The younger son, who's entitled to a lesser amount of land, just because that's the way it was in those days, comes to his father and says, I want you to give me my inheritance right now. I don't want to stay here anymore. I don't want to work this farm. I don't want to be with you. I'm going to take my inheritance and leave. Huge ask of the father. Really big ask because, first of all, land in those days was a sign of power. It held your position in the community. This was unheard of that this son would do that with his father at the time. But what does the father do? And this is, the son's basically saying, I really don't want you. I want your wealth. I want whatever I can buy out in the world, but not you. It's such a rejected love at its essence. But what does the father do? He does exactly that. He gives away a third of his wealth. He blesses the son, and the son goes out. And of course, we know this story. He squanders the money on what's called riotous living, which means food and wine and women. And then the famine comes, and he comes home. And when he comes home, and we just heard the whole story, the father is just thrilled to receive him. And that's what he does. And he just takes even more of his wealth and he bestows it on his son. However, there's an older son. And the older son comes out and says to one of the workers, I hear all this noise, and it was a celebration that had already started. What's happening? And he said, your brother has returned, and your father has asked us to kill the fatted son and to celebrate. And what happens with the older son? He gets furious, and he goes to the father. The father's saying, come in, your brother's returned. But the older son in the parable won't even refer to him as his brother. He says to his father, that's your son. And he said, how can this be? I have stayed here, I have worked with you, I have lived in your home, I've done everything for you. You wouldn't even give me a kid. it says in the Bible, but you give him the fatted cow. And the father looks at the older brother with so much love, and he said, but you have me always. Even now you have me, and everything that is mine is yours, which can be taken at the literal level because the older son was actually entitled to the remaining 2/3 of the value of the land. But of course, there's such a deeper meaning there. This father saying, nothing's happened here. You still have me. You'll always have me. Everything that is mine is yours. Everything I am, you are too. But the older son will not go inside. And then the parable ends. We don't really know what happens to him. But there's so much, again, deeper meaning in this. Here is the father who in those days would have been thought of as being stern and the rule maker and very, I don't think it's politically correct these days to use these terms, but since it was 2,000 years ago, I will. Very male, that was the role of the father. And here Jesus is introducing this notion of the father as being loving and generous and completely forgiving. It doesn't matter what we did, and there's no judgment. I mean, it says to all of us, no matter what you do, and no matter whether you are even able to know all of what you've done, if you come to me, I will totally receive you back. I'm waiting for you. For me, you never went anywhere. That's, as Swamiji says, that's the human mind working. That's not the love of God that says, I'm always here, you've never quit being a part of me, and you are turning your attention around and realizing it. And he did things that one might not have thought of in those days as the father doing it, but that the mother would do it. He ran to his son, he kissed his son. This is just not, again, in those days, the way things were. So I read this and I was thinking, here was Jesus introducing the whole concept of divine mother, of the totality of God himself. Because interestingly, both of these sons, we think of the good son and the bad son. And the good son we hold as the one who came home. But here was as the one who stayed home, and the bad son is the one who left. But the bad son who left comes back with at least humility. And the good son actually gets very self-righteous and egoic and critical. He's really misbehaving. And I looked at that and I thought, even those of us who are, what would the word that I would use, sort of being religious in these days, doing the right thing. If we're doing the right thing for the wrong reason, we're not really the good son, that we're still needing God's constant forgiveness, and that we need, those of us who are conscious and aware and walking our path, need to really be mindful as much as we can about why we're doing it. Do we want God's things, even his praise or his land in the end, or all of the toys that he offers, all of those material desires that pull us out, or those ways of the ego that have us feel good about ourselves? Do we want that, or do we want God? And in this case, we see that it's not what it looked like. And so we have to, or we're being given the opportunity to, take even a deeper look at ourselves and say to ourselves, not just our behavior, it's the motivation behind it. And what are we able to do constantly that we're doing for God, with God, because we want God's love and protection, not his things. I had a very powerful dream a few weeks ago now that I'd like to share with you. Most everybody knows that earlier this year I went through 4 months of working through a tragedy in our family where our son-in-law, who was 50 years old, wound up passing from a bad cancer. And the whole time that I was going through that and supporting the family, and they were down in Los Angeles, so it took a total of 13 trips up and back in 4 months. It was a lot, and there's much more to the story, it doesn't matter. But I always knew, it's not just that I felt, I knew that the only way it was happening, the way it was happening, with love, with generosity, with total inward peace, was pure grace. It felt to me humanly impossible. And I just felt God was saying to me, you're meant to be there, you're meant to help, I'll be here, I'll help you do it. And he did. And it was a beautiful 4 months. Could have been called many other things, but it was beautiful. A couple weeks after Alan passed, I had to make a trip to Los Angeles. I hadn't been there now for 2 weeks. And I realized almost immediately that grace had ascended, and it was just me. I really felt like, oh boy, I felt how hard it was driving to LA, being in a home that's not your own, that doesn't function like your own, that's very noisy, televisions, computers, wrong music, challenging stories being read to the kids at night, nothing of my world there. And it was a very different experience. The last night I was there, I had this dream. And in the dream, Master came into the dream, though I didn't see him, but his presence was very real to me. And I hadn't been calling him. I wasn't praying, I wasn't meditating, I was sound asleep. He came and he initiated all of this. My words, these were his words coming through me. I hope that makes sense. But I said to him, Master, I have felt so close to you, so expansive. I felt how thin that veil is between delusion and truth. I've been living there for these months. And I said to him, I'm so afraid that when I leave this body, and when I come back next time, I don't want to have to start over. I don't want to have to start back where I started this life and spend at least 73 years getting to where I am now. I said, so I really want your help. I don't want to have to do this again. And he very sweetly, with all the love in the world, again, I couldn't see him, but no judgment, nothing, but just pure love, no promise, no criticism. He said to me, oh, you've been here before. And the feeling was, many times have you run through this whole play, this whole dream to get here. Now, 2 things happened to me with that dream. First, I felt like, oh boy, wow, I could do this again. I could spend a whole life getting back to this place. He just told me I did it. But it was absolutely perfect acceptance on his part. Perfect. I felt encouraged to make as much progress as I could. It wasn't me feeling like, oh, now I really have to work. It was God himself saying, without any words, but just his presence, his energy. You can do this. All of us can do this. All we need to do is come home. That's all. Our willingness, our acceptance, our desire to know the truth and to live in that infinite mansion, as Swamiji calls it, with God is all that has to happen. We've been on our own journey. We have the same story. We know because Master and Swamiji have told us, so we see it pretty clearly that God manifested us from himself. There is no separation there. But we too had that choice. We too turned and went out, and we got hungry. We experienced the same hunger, each and every one of us. It's exactly what turned us back here. And God is not judging us. There was no judgment in that dream. He already knew. He knew about all of my lives, all of my foibles. He sees all of the ways I'm messing up in this life. Messing up means not putting all of my energy in the right direction, being tugged on by those endless egoic lures and tugs and then limitations. He already knows. All he wants to do is help us see them with him in this place of pure, unconditional love so that he can take us from where we are to what is our birthright. It's exactly what was happening in that parable. And Jesus was saying, the Father, God himself, he doesn't care if you went out and you took your money and you had this riotous living, or if you stayed home and looked like it was serving him, but you were a little self-righteous, you were judgmental of other people, here was the older son, he was not going to help the younger son come home. So wherever we are in that whole scheme of things, God simply doesn't care. He's an endless source. It's what he is. He is the source of love, of constant forgiveness, acceptance. I heard a Nandi talk about this once. I don't know if it was this talk, but it was something. She said it always brings up the image of a hose for her. And it's actually a great image. You turn the hose on and the water comes, if it's connected, of course. And you just do that. And I thought about in my house, I have I don't know what they're called, but one of those switches. So the water's either going out into the timer so the yard will get watered, or I turn it the other way, I can water the yard. And it's endless. I don't think about it. I don't have to look for the source. When I'm ready for the water, it's there, it flows. Then I turn it off. And in essence, it really is a beautiful, it's not a beautiful image, but it's a real image of God's love. It's always there. It's always ready to flow. It's always ready to come and to take us. And all we need to do, as the Gita reading says, is look inward, come inward, because really finding God means calming all of that emotion, all of that desire, everything that's going out. When we bring it in and we've calmed it, then we are naturally back at home. We are naturally with God. And he doesn't care how we get there. And that's what's so beautiful about this parable. It's so simple. And it's just so loving in the end. It's not come home to mom. It's come home to your Father. Jesus just turned this all around. And he said, in the divine is everything you need. It's your mother, it's your father, it's unconditional love, acceptance, forgiveness, anytime. We cannot do anything that is so wrong that God won't forgive it. You know, Davy said once that in all of the time that she spent counseling people at the village, the number one thing that she heard is that people felt unworthy of God's love. Over and over, she heard it. Isn't that just amazing? It's so sad. And with that, people are afraid to come to God. They're afraid to tell the truth. And you read this parable, and you think about it, and you realize this is Jesus himself saying this to us. We can't get it wrong. The only way we can get it wrong is if we don't go to God with everything. And as soon as we turn to God, his arms are open. He himself is putting the shoes on our feet, the rings on our hand, the cloaks. He's feeding us. He's holding us in his state of eternal and divine love. Bless you.
All your children, mother, call you, knowing not it's you they call. Some through mists of their unknowing, bruised and hurting when they fall, turn away, but who can leave you? You, the mother of us all. If the child forgets its mother, will she coldly turn away? Wise or foolish, we're your children. Guide us, Mother, if we stray. Those whose hearts are torn with anguish lack the power your name to call. Heal their wounds more, soothe their sorrows. You, the mother of us all. Heal their wounds, Ma, soothe their sorrows. You, the mother